The first lightning flash of Alef book was called Deep Principles of Kabbalistic Alchemy. And that was like a mining operation. It was an excavation of a symbol system that was trying to communicate these concerns that I've been describing, which I've been involved in for now, at this point, over 30 years. But at the time of writing that book, I wanted to communicate these concerns in a language that didn't really exist. I wanted to use existing languages, Kabbalistic languages, alchemical languages, but I wanted to use them in a new way. So I wanted to construct a way of communicating this that didn't start from scratch, but took existing symbol systems and used them differently than they had been before. So I needed to remake the symbols. I needed to re-envision the symbols and how they would function. And I ended up using things that people already knew about, obviously the Tree of Life and the Worlds and the Tzimtzum and the construction of lights and vessels from technical Kabbalah, as well as alchemical stages and transmutation described in ways that people would find familiar, but to a different end, with a different tone, with a different emphasis, because most of that stuff is operating from that emanationist standpoint, which is really not that different from ordinary conceptuality. And it's really rare that you have esoteric subjects that truly deviate from the way that ordinary conceptuality works and really makes a break from it. Sorry about the microphone there. So the first book, Deep Principles, was a mining excavation, and the great majority of it was excavated in hypnagogic states. Like there's this period in the early morning between like 3 and 5 a.m. where I would either be awakened from sleep or I would be sort of semi-awake in a twilight. And since this is what I do, I live in retreat and this is all I think about. That is what was on my mind. I didn't have to switch to it. And without getting into a whole big description that could be misinterpreted, let's just say that these symbols presented themselves and I had to write them down immediately or draw them out immediately. So I went through this period of almost every night getting a new presentation, which added to the pile. And at the end of this process, I had so many different parts, I wasn't yet entirely sure how they all work together, but I put them all in the same place and I realized, this is a book. So the first book was just the mining operation itself. It's difficult to read and is sort of at points even unreadable, but it's like the raw data. It's the pile of symbols with the view that I've imbued them with, presented for the first time in a new way. The second lightning flash of Alef book was an attempt to describe the contemplative process, but through the lens of the Iyun literature of 13th century Kabbalah, especially this one section which describes a hierarchy through which the mystic passes from the Sefer HaIyun, which is one of the main texts of this style of Kabbalah, 13th century pre-Lurianic Kabbalah, the earliest medieval Kabbalah that there is. And I basically give a commentary on this progression. Now, both my attempt at the description of the contemplative process and my commentary on Sefer HaIyun were adapted much more concisely over time as I considered them and used them. So this volume 2 is sort of the raw data that led me to that. It's the predecessor of the essay that I just put out, where I summed up the contemplative process in a way that I think people can really understand and relate to, hopefully with a lot of technical Kabbalah, though. But it really comes from my use of this Iyun material, which is a contemplative style of Kabbalah that is really obscure, right? Most people only know either Lurianic Kabbalah or the sort of Western esoteric post-Golden Dawn Hermetic Kabbalah from the Renaissance, the sort of post-Christian Hermetic Western esoteric simplified version with a single tree in the register of the four worlds. Most people know that. Certainly your audience would. The third volume of Lightning Flash of Aleph was the breakthrough, where I got a comprehensive view of the entire path. And I mapped it out as separate diagrams, 32 separate diagrams. And I referred to them as the 32 keys. It's an overview. It's an overview of the entirety of the path, the ground, the process, the culmination. And I put out that book with a set of instructions as to how to do a rudimentary practice to develop the skills that one would need, as well as separate chapters on each of the 32 diagrams with a little commentary on each. And that was out for a few years until I really thought about it even more and realized, I could say this even better. I could make this even more clear. So I rewrote the entire book, basically every sentence in the book, literally a real rewrite, not just a touch up. And I put it out again as a second edition, same volume 3, same set of 32 diagrams. And that's the 32 Keys second edition. I still call it volume 3, even though it came out years later. So that's the overview. And for the first time, when I put out 32 Keys, the stuff in the first 2 volumes started to snap into place, and I realized what I was actually getting at. Now, that doesn't diminish the first 2 volumes in importance if you want to see how the stuff arose in its raw state, right? Look at the first volume. If you want to see insights in the context for the Iyun material and the first attempt to look at contemplation, look at the second volume. But it's only by the third volume that I actually wrote a book. I don't even think the first 2 volumes are complete books. They're sort of like raw data. The 4th volume was something that I needed to do for years, because starting around 2006, my main concern in this subject has revolved around an obsession that I have with a certain 13th century Kabbalistic text from that Iyun lineage called the Fountain of Wisdom. So the 4th volume is a translation of the Fountain of Wisdom by the only guy who ever put out a translation in English, Dr. Mark Verman, and he wrote a special corrected translation for my book, which is better than the one that he put out in his own book, which was in the 80s. No one else ever translated it into English in its complete form other than Verman. So I got in touch with him, got him to concede to spiff up certain parts that we had agreed one could look deeper into. And I put it out as well as my own commentary on it. And that's volume 4. Volume 5 of the Lightning Flash of Aleph series is a very odd book indeed, very much like the Eneatych, composed of 3 different parts. The first part analyzes this metaphor for conceptual constructs and their use in the guise of a golem. And golems are seen in this mythological context because of this history that they have in folklore of being sort of animated monsters, like proto-Frankenstein monsters that go out and do the bidding of the magician to terrorize the town and, go get the ignorant villagers with the torches and the pitchforks and whatnot, made out of mud. All of this is a metaphor, of course, because a golem is just a mental construct that is imbued with life force. It's a charged mental construct. Any magician will know what I'm talking about here. You make a mental construct, you pour tremendous amounts of life force with intentionality mixed together into it, it comes to life. It's the basis of the whole thing of talismanic magic when you're making magical objects. So if one were to do this in a systematic way with the elements that comprise a mental constructs, which are the elements that comprise reality itself, one has an awesome tool there to do whatever one wants to with it. So that's part of the 5th volume, which is called Quintessence of Secret Mercury. The title, Quintessence of Secret Mercury, comes from a retreat text that I did 3 years of silent, solitary retreat of different types. And during that period of my retreat period, I made these wild notations that it wasn't like writing a book or anything. It was just things that I wrote down involving symbols and my own work and my own inquiry. Eventually, what I did is I collected all that stuff and edited it and put it together in one place and became a text. The subsection of Quintessence of Secret Mercury that bears that title is the last chapter of the book, and it's all my retreat materials. And what's interesting about it is it's kind of like the Rosetta Stone for everything else that came later. This is before Lightning Flash of Aleph and all that, but all of those symbols are there. And when I looked at it again after years, when I was putting together Lightning Flash of Aleph, I couldn't believe it. It's like everything was there that I needed in its embryonic state, right? So if you're interested in this material, it's very interesting to look at that text. It also has a kind of a weird twilight poetry, a psychoetheric poetry that's beautiful in its own right, I believe. The other part of that volume, that 5th volume, is a Mutus Liber style text. Now, there's an alchemical text called the Mutus Liber, but it's actually a category of wordless book. It's a book comprised of images, right? And I did a 16-image cycle, a 16-image Mutus Liber cycle that I later added captions to, but the bulk of it was done as a wordless book. And it describes the mystical process, the mystico-alchemical process. And that's volume 5. Volume 6, Lightning Flash of Aleph, volume 6, is a very kind of dark and mysterious book called Black Aether. And Black Aether is a presentation of a single metaphor that spins out into all these different correspondences. But the central metaphor of that book is that of animal sacrifice, which is a greatly misunderstood topic because all of the Judeo-Christian tradition is based on animal sacrifice. The sacrifice is done at the Holy Temple of the Jews in ancient times, which was destroyed twice, once by the Babylonians, once by the Romans. And after the destruction of the Second Temple, you have no more temple. You have no more ability to do the animal sacrifices that were commanded in the Torah. So what do? What did the Jews do? Well, they put together a system of prayers and intentions and ways to study that became Rabbinic Judaism, which is the form of Judaism we know today. That's where it comes from. The only reason we have Rabbinic Judaism is because we can't do animal sacrifices, which is what the so-called creator God said he wanted: blood and guts smoking, so that the smoke would rise into the sky and dissipate. And essentially, the creator God entity could eat it, which is to eat the life force that went into it, mixed with the intentionality of its offering. Does that sound suspiciously like a regional protector entity that wanted to feed off of the life force of beings when they had been decimated in the fire? Yes, suspiciously so, in my opinion. That's another topic for another time. What was the God of the ancient Israelites? That's a very interesting topic to look into. Either way, since Christianity comes from Judaism and Judaism comes from animal sacrifice is a pretty potent metaphor. And certainly mystically, sacrificing one's life force, pouring out one's life force in divine inquiry is a very viable model. But when you think about it, you realize that this beast, the sacrificial beast that is laying on the smoking, fiery altar, is itself divine, because everything is. If we hold a non-dual, non-emanationistic view, you can't say that this particular substance is or is not part of the wholeness. It's all part of the wholeness. So what's very interesting about the animal sacrifice at that point as a metaphor is the flesh of the beast is divine. The open expanse into which the smoke of its decimated carcass is released is divine. So the metaphor of animal sacrifice is the divine sacrificing itself to itself through itself. And what a great metaphor to apply to the human mind and one's own intentions. We have egocentric, reductionistic, ordinary conceptuality. That's the beast. The flesh of our own psychophysical organism is what we offer. We pour the whole thing into the fire of our own work, laying ourselves at the altar of sacrifice, which is our own practice, to release into the expanse of infinity, which is not other than what we are offering. So the flesh of the beast sacrifices itself to a God that it already is. And that's the main metaphor of black ether, because what happens when that sacrifice goes deep, 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 deep is you realize that all the reductions, all the skins of reduction can dissolve on contact. So the whole book is about that process, using some fairly dark language. So it's called Black Ether accordingly. That's volume 6. Volume 7 is the Eneatych, where I give the central practice, the curriculum, and an essay explaining how to use it. And that's a set.